My name is John, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the sort of debut episode of the brand new podcast called Use Your Head. This is the Use Your Head podcast. More on that in just a moment. But before I continue, if you are tuning in to listen to the Audiobook Trail podcast, about a month ago, actually a little more than a month ago, I announced that the Audiobook Trail podcast would be coming to an end. There are a number of reasons for this, and if you missed those, I would encourage you to go back and listen to the last episode of the Audiobook Trail, or I'll give you a brief rundown right now of why we ended it. For one thing, my audiobook career has taken a turn from a full-time, gainful employment situation, thanks to AI and a number of other things, to a part-time situation. I want to make clear once again, I'm not getting out of the business. I still love storytelling. I will always love storytelling. I loved storytelling before I even got into storytelling. So that's not the reason. The reason is that I've kind of run out of things to talk about in the audiobook world because I don't do it full-time anymore. And I'm in the process of looking through some other things in my life, some changes in my life. And as a result, I'm starting a new podcast called the Use Your Head podcast. I'm going to talk about that in greater detail later on in our time together today. There'll be a number of changes. It's going to sound very different from the Audiobook Trail, and that's on purpose. I'm not trying to alter the old show into something new. I felt it was better to let the Audiobook Trail rest as it was and create something new. This program is going to be simpler in format. It's going to be looser in format. This is hard for me because coming from radio, we didn't always have those freedoms. You know, you have 30 minutes or it was a network show. You have 1 hour. You got to hit it right on the 60. And all those things are not true in the podcast world, which is a wonderful flash of freedom, if you will. And it enables us as podcasters to be very, very free with what we're led to share. And that's going to be very much a driving force behind the new program. Now, before we go any further, I mentioned changes in my life. I need to explain something to the Audiobook Trail audience. Many of you, by the way, have emailed me and said, hey, I'm with you all the way. I'll follow wherever you go. Eventually, we will have a Use Your Head podcast on all the platforms where the Audiobook Trail is now. And the Audiobook Trail, by the way, will stay there. It will be, kind of archived, and people can pop in and listen. There just won't be any new episodes of that show. But for the time being, I'm going to use the Audiobook Trail, and I'm going to copy these episodes to both shows so that as listeners transition over, I won't leave anybody, I won't break the coupling on the railroad cars, if you will. I want to bring everyone along that wants to come along. And by the way, if you only listened to the Audiobook Trail because it was all about audiobooks, which it really hasn't been for some time, in all honesty, then I want to thank you for listening. And if you go on to something else, I hope you find some great content that feeds your soul and entertains you if this new show is not that. But I promised on that last episode of Audiobook Trail that I was going to take a week off. Okay, remember I said I'm going to take a week off and then I'll be back with you on June the 12th. That was what I said. And I know many of you came back on June the 12th and did not find a new episode. And a lot of you waited another week and you didn't find another episode on the 19th either. I need to tell you that me and my family suffered a tremendous tragedy last month, in the month of June. My dear mother, Susan, passed away on June the 21st, rather unexpectedly. The day after, or a few days after, I posted that last episode of the Audiobook Trail, I received a phone call from my mother saying that she was having some difficulty and was going to enter the hospital. And in the interest of privacy, I'm not going to discuss the details of what went wrong, but she was ill. And shockingly, we all believed that she would recover. It was not a serious illness. It was certainly nothing terminal or anything like that. And I may, down the road share a little more about this. Right now, it's still very painful and very raw. But during the month of June, I was away from my studio. I was in my mom's town in Oklahoma, by her bedside in the hospital, visiting her. and taking care of things at her house. She had a dog, and she had, things that needed to be, they had a hailstorm. And so she was waiting on an adjuster. Life was happening, but she was in the hospital. So I rode into the rescue and said, Ma, I'll handle the daily things while you recover. But it was not meant to be. She worsened and worsened and finally passed away on June the 21st. Obviously, as much as I love podcasting, as much as I love audience, as much as I love what I do, I didn't do a flippin' thing for several weeks. I have been walking through a very difficult period, not just of grief, but also with the business side of losing a loved one. As my mother's eldest son, it is now left to me to handle all of those final arrangements, which of course the funeral has already happened, but there are many more things that have to continue in order to, and I'll just put it, let's just be real, okay, close out a life. My mother was 77 years old. Again, I'm very surprised that that's all the time that she got. However, I am at peace. I am a God-fearing man who believes that we all have an appointed time, and then that's it. When we use up our days, then it's all over. And I did not realize that Mom's life would be as short as it was. However, she is in fact gone, and I am adjusting. So I say all of that to let you know and to really just make an excuse about why I've been gone for so long. I've received emails. People have been concerned about me. Did something happen to me? Did I change my mind? Did I, go nuts? Whatever. It went sort of nuts. I'll tell you that. I don't know if you've ever lost a parent or someone like that. Heaven forbid, lost a spouse or a child. It changes you. It changes your life. You can deny it all you want, but your life's never the same. And there's an adaptation process. We like to laugh that shrinks will tell us that, in the grieving process, you got to go through the stages. You got to, first there's going to be disbelief and denial, and then you're going to go through anger. We kind of yuck about that, but it's absolutely true. There are the stages. I recognize them, and I'm walking through that season right now with my sister and the rest of my family. All is well, and we are recovering. We miss Mom, but at the same time, we know that life goes on, and the show must go on. That, of course, is what my mother would want. And so I am finally in a place now that we are into the second week of July. I'm finally in a place now where I feel like it's time to lift the pause button on life. And not that I don't still have tons of Mom's affairs to take care of. This will take a long, long time. But it's now time to get back. And so I am back. So with that, I hope you understand why I wasn't able to post anything or anything like that. I was just so consumed with taking care of Mom, and then when she died, there was a period of shock, and now we are moving on from that. And I'm delighted to be back with you. I have missed doing the show. I've missed. I was tossing around ideas, as I told you at the end of May, about what the new podcast would be like, and I've heard from many of you all with your ideas and suggestions and encouragement. I cannot thank you enough. I could never thank you enough for that inspiration. If there's no audience, there's no show. Okay, I mean, I can stand in the shower and do a show, but there's only, aside from my dog, there's no other audience. The audience makes the show. When I was a disc jockey, I believed that. When I work in the theater, I believe that. And when I do podcasting, I believe that. And when I do the Guitar Foster Parent YouTube video series, I believe that. Without the audience, there is no show. Thank you for your support. I appreciate it. So let's pivot now and talk about the new show. It's going to be called the Use Your Head podcast. I teased this some in the latter stages of the Audiobook Trail, and because I've often felt like that I have a lot to say. All right, as a disc jockey for years, and then with all the different things that I've done. Some of them well, some of them very amateurish, but I've learned all along the way. And as I've moved through my life, I'm now in my 50s, and so I like to say I'm in the latter half. If I'm blessed enough to live to 100, I may be in the latter third. I don't know. God forbid. I don't know what my days will be. I feel like I have a lot to say. And it occurs to me that as I've been walking through, and especially when we were talking about AI and its impact on arts and entertainment, and it impacts every part of our lives. But in my world, vocationally anyhow, the arts and entertainment, as I felt my way through that, often in disbelief of what I'm seeing and reading, I discover that when we process things like this, or when I do, I very simply sometimes start with, use your head. Think it out. What would Mr. Spock say? Use logic first. What does your common sense tell you? What does Jiminy Cricket say in the back of your head when you see something strange or outrageous or different, or something that may seem incongruous with what you thought was happening in the world around you? And I'm not just talking about politics, of course. I'm talking about science. I'm talking about culture. I'm talking about any number of things that we observe in the world around us. I have always thought that the best way to start when finding out where I'm going to land is to use my head. Take my values and my beliefs, which are always an overlay on how I process anything, and certainly during my mother's illness and death. That was a huge, last month, a huge part of how I processed and dealt with something the nurse said, or a piece of news from the doctor, or a piece of advice from a friend, or what have you. There's always that overlay of what I believe about what's real, my faith, my values. Those things are locked in stone. They do not change. And so I peer through those like a transparency, and that becomes a lens on how I process everything else. At that point, I use my head. Does what I'm reading make sense? How can I make it make sense to me? Using my head. And so I thought just in the past few days, and I want to make clear, during the time I was taking care of Mom, I didn't think at all about any of this. I planned to. In fact, when I knew I was going to be leaving town, when she was going in the hospital and I had to help her out, I took my laptop with me and I took my notebooks with me, and I even threw a microphone in my bag in case I decided to maybe record something on the road. Didn't do any of that. Didn't think about any of it. And as she grew worse, I thought about it even less. But like I say, this idea of use your head, as it turns out, there's not a podcast out there called Use Your Head, which I find sad and shocking. I find that most of the time when I look around the world and I see the things that people are doing, they're not using their head. They're using their social media, and they're using whatever's trendy and cool. They're not using their head. And then another part of that is, are we even teaching our young people how to use their head anymore? There's a rub, and we could talk endlessly about that. So that is going to be, that's kind of a general canopy over what the Use Your Head podcast is going to be as we go forward. Now, several major changes. If you're an Audiobook Trail listener, as you know, I structured that show just like an old radio show. And, in some ways it was a bit antiquated, and I'll confess that. I went back and thought, I maybe made this a little too rigid for the modern podcast listener. I can confess that. That's okay. Oh, there's something beeping on my laptop there. See, this is a very free form type of show. And that's one of the things that's going to change. There's going to be much less production. There's going to be much less, like the old show was 30 minutes, maybe 31, but I kept it toward a close networky half hour. This program won't be that way. I'm not going to let it stretch on and on and on. I can't foresee this becoming one of those, hour and a half podcasts. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Many of those do very, very well because there are hosts that are talented enough to be compelling for that long, or have content that's compelling for that long. I'm going to let the content be the guide of how long the episodes of the Use Your Head podcast are going to be. There are a lot of things to talk about. This is an election year. I will not shy away from those types of things. I am not going to be overly concerned about. Look, here's the thing. When I was brought up by my now dearly departed mother, I was taught that be who you are, believe what you believe, but never set out with the intention of offending or hurting someone else. If they are hurt or offended, then that is on them. If you're not intending to go out, in other words, don't walk into a debate with a hatchet in your hand. Use ideas, use logic, use passion, but respect people. All right. And so that is what that's going to be my guide with the Use Your Head podcast. I may say things that rub you the wrong way, and you may scream at your phone or whatever and you may send me a nasty email and call me names. That's okay. I've been called so many names in my life. I can't look. When I was a disc jockey, I used to get all kinds of bizarre phone calls and notes in the mail. We didn't have email for most of my radio career. Telling me that I was an idiot and I can't believe anybody would ever hire you. I've had audiobooks I've done that have been reviewed that have said the same kind of thing. That's okay. You know what? That's fine. Because guess what? If you're listening and you're bothered by what I do, you're still listening. And so that's fine. It doesn't bother me. But my pledge to you is I'm never going to set out to deliberately hurt people. I don't do that. I don't deliberately hurt anyone. That's not in my nature. It's not in my makeup. I am one who approaches people in love and peace, and I will defend myself if need be. But I'm never an aggressor. I don't. That's just not how. That's not my code. That's not that transparency, that lens that we talked about earlier. So you can expect that from me. But I'm not going to focus in. I'm not going to become a cable news channel that deals in the trade of building anger in people. That is not what I'm going to do. That kind of stuff turns my stomach, frankly. And so I am all about open discussion and ideas and using my head. And so the Using Your Head podcast begins today. This is kind of an explanation episode and kind of telling you why we're late getting going on this. I am going to try to do this weekly, but I am not going to commit to posting the same day every week. I've been told by several people that is an old school thing. And I thought, well, what do you mean? You got to know when the show is. What I was reminded is in podcasting, it doesn't matter. If someone subscribes to your podcast, they're probably going to get a note on their device saying, hey, there's a new episode of the Use Your Head podcast available now. It doesn't matter when it is. And listeners listen whenever they feel like it anyway. So I'm going to give myself permission to be a little more free than I was with the Audiobook Trail, which, it was like radio. I didn't allow myself to be the master of the schedule once it was set. I'm not going to do that anymore. So this show will be much more free. I'm going to endeavor to have guests from time to time. That's difficult for me to do much of the time. But if I find somebody that wants to come on and chat about a particular topic that I feel like they could add something to the discussion, I might bring them on the phone, or I might bring them in the room if possible, or may even do some pre-recorded stuff and plug it in, whatever. We'll try to do that as well. I may bring in some different types of content from time to time to enhance the discussion. But it's basically going to be, when you set up a new podcast, the podcast folks, the hosts, always want to ask you, well, what category is your podcast in? Is it like, for example, have you seen the Hulu show, Only Murders in the Building with Steve Martin and Martin Short and Selena Gomez? Great show, by the way. Very, very funny. That show is about a podcast, and they do a true crime podcast, which I'm told still is one of the most popular categories of podcast there is true crime. So, they want to know what your category is. I selected culture, very generic. And you can drill down more specifically, but I selected culture, because I think that encompasses a lot of different things, whether it's the big issues of the day, the little issues of the day. One of those things is artificial intelligence. By the way, did you hear that Jimmy Stewart is going to start doing audiobooks this fall? Yeah, that Jimmy Stewart. And Judy Garland is going to read The Wizard of Oz. Did you hear about that? And did you also hear that James Dean is going to be narrating audiobooks this fall? It's coming all completely apart. Now they're all three of them, their estates, their heirs, who are the people that are in charge of their, that own that. See, once again, I don't see how a dead person can have, well, anyway, that's another discussion for another time, but they have given permission through whatever legal means are available, they have sold permission to these producers to use the likeness, the audio likeness, the voice pattern of people that have been dead for years. I mean, how long has Judy Garland been gone? Decades. So that's happening, and I'm not surprised. I knew it was going to happen. I hoped it wouldn't, but I knew it was. And so anyway, that's a cultural issue in my, it's not just technology that affects our culture, because if we're not going to let famous people die, if death is not going to be able to stop them from creating. Here's another thing I heard about, the band Kiss. All right. If you haven't seen a Kiss concert, well, it's too late because they're done. Or are they? Because they've now announced that they're going to have, and they didn't use the term AI, but they're, the 4 characters in the band Kiss, they're going to have virtual, I guess, holograms made of themselves, and they're still going to perform and it's AI. I mean, that's what it is. They're going to be, so that they can live on. And the way they explained it is something to the effect of the art is such that it deserves to live on forever or whatever. And I'm thinking, no, you know what, guys, you're human. Behind the makeup, behind the masks, all celebrities are just people. They have BO just like everyone else. And when they go to the bathroom, it smells just like everyone else. I'm not going to be explicit either on this show, by the way. So you don't have to worry. There won't be any labels. I'm not going to, drop any bombs or anything like that. That's just not how I am. Just because you're famous and rich doesn't mean you get to live forever. And I think people that are using technology to violate that central truth are just wrong. All right. And I'll argue that all day long till I'm blue in the face. So anyway, but that's happening in audiobooks. We'll talk about AI and not just audiobooks, but in a broader sense now and so forth. So anyway, what we're going to do, and once again, to kind of explain, as I thought about, I didn't want to just start a new podcast because just like I always promised, I don't have data on who listens. I know where they're listening from, and I know how many and to what, but I don't know who. And so I can't contact the audience and say, hey, debuting, on July whatever is this new show, make sure you come along. So what I'm having to do is bridge that gap by posting. So I'll post this episode as episode 64 on the Audiobook Trail, and then it will be episode 1 on the Use Your Head podcast. I will do that for several shows to give people time to subscribe to the new one. Now, as you're hearing this, you're probably not going to find this podcast on the platforms yet. It takes time for them to, once you upload an episode, then, and some of the platforms require more than one. So, it may take, a couple of months for some of the platforms to get it. Well, I will keep an eye on that. And once all the platforms have the Use Your Head podcast listed so that they can be subscribed to, that's when I will kind of drop off, the Audiobook Trail and let it kind of drift into the ether. It will still be out there as long as my hosting service keeps it. And, the fee that I pay says they keep it in perpetuity. So as long as we have an internet, then those episodes will be out there. But the new show, we'll be duping for a time until, and yes, it does cost me more money. I don't care. I want everyone to have a chance to come along if they want to. If you don't, no hard feelings. Okay. I get it. People's interests change and that's perfectly fine. I will give it the old college try and say, give us a try. You might like it. And so I hope that you will. One final thing, and then we'll wrap up for today. Another thing that I'm going to really try to focus on the Use Your Head podcast is a lot of interaction. Okay, not only am I going to invite you to email me, and, we'll have a email bag kind of thing like we had with the Dear John. I may keep the Dear John idea because it's, sort of funny, I guess. But anyway, I want to get your emails. But what I would also love to have is I would love to have your voice. Okay, I'd love to have your voice. Most people with a smartphone can send voice messages, okay? And you can send those through email or text. So once I have an email presence set up, and I'm working on that right now, once I have that, or you can still use the Audiobook Trail email address, john@audiobooktrail.com. You can send me that. I would love to put you on the show if you have a comment or a question. I would love to hear your voice. And so if you would be so good as to send that in an MP3, which is easy to email as long as it's not super long, send it along and you can be a guest on the Use Your Head podcast. That was an idea that I stole from a friend of mine. Says, why don't you just do that? It's easy. Everybody knows how to do it. I said, well, maybe everybody but me. But when I went on my phone, sure enough, son of a gun, it's right there. You just touch the microphone and you can blab away, and then you can send it through any number of means right from your smartphone. And amazing. So I'm going to be encouraging you to do that as well. If you, and so obviously if you want to, comment on something we talked about on the last show, we'll revisit that as we go forward, as long as, the comment, I'm not guaranteeing everybody will get on, but if you have something compelling to say, unless it's just really bad, I'll put you on, because again, there is no show without what? Audience. That's right. So, sorry if this little, almost half hour together was a downer. I have, some of you that I've developed relationships with through the Audiobook Trail already knew this news. Some of you were demanding answers. I've got to know what's going on. I'm worried about you. It's so sweet. It's just, the same thing happened in my radio career. People get to look at you as a friend, and boy, there's such tremendous value. I can't tell you. I don't want to get emotional, but it's too late. Several of you have sent just lovely, lovely emails with your prayers and thoughts and comfort and encouragement. And I had one guy say, "Oh yeah, I lost my mom last year, and and here's what you can look forward to, and you'll get better and it'll get easier and all of that." And all of that stuff are pearls of great price to me, and I want you to know that. But for those of you that didn't know what happened, that's what happened. I went through my priest at my church just lost his mother a few months before my mom passed away, and he told me that it's like a club. When you lose a parent, it's like you join a club that you really don't want to belong to. But most of us, if we're fortunate enough to live long enough, do end up in that club. And for me, I'm now a member of it, and it's not fun, but it's getting better. So thank you for those thoughts. I really, really appreciate it. On we go with the Use Your Head podcast. And so I will encourage you as we wrap up today that whatever you're doing in the culture, start with using your head. I'm John McLean. I'll see you probably next week with a episode in earnest. Thanks for listening. Subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.